I, Chris Walker, was standing in the kitchen, putting the final touches on tonight's dinner. My wife, Paula, had gotten away for the weekend with her friends to celebrate the fact that in a few months they would all be turning 30. I was eagerly waiting for her return home. We had been married for 5 years, and this was her last big event before we started the next phase of our journey, having children. Everything was planned. A few years ago, we had just moved into our new home. The house was old, but I had put in a lot of work to fix it up due to its poor condition when we bought it. We got a great deal. I did most of the work myself, and thanks to careful planning, I managed to save on a lot of materials, which meant we surprisingly had a good amount of resources left over. Paula and I were a typical couple. We met on a warm summer day at a backyard party hosted by her brother. She was 22 and I was 23, though her birthday was actually in September and mine in April. Neither of us went to college. I worked as a truck driver for a local transport company, and she worked at a local bank. Neither of us had any dreams of becoming millionaires, but as a couple, we felt very comfortable. We got married 2 years after we met. Our marriage was strong, but over the last few months, things had become a bit tense. Paula was worried about the responsibilities that came with motherhood, and it didn't help that some of her friends weren't married and lived accordingly. One of them in particular annoyed me, Steph. She was your typical party girl. Every time we saw her, she was with a different guy. Once I asked her what she wanted to do in life, and she replied, "I want to be a woman who sleeps around." I figured she was pretty good at it. I heard Paula's car pull up to the house and checked the timer on the oven. The lasagna would be ready in 10 minutes. The red wine was already open and breathing, the garlic bread toasted and cooling, and the salad was in the fridge, waiting to be served. When I turned around, Paula was walking through the door, and I knew immediately she had cheated on me. How did I know? The smug smile on her face, the glimmer in her eyes, said, "I did it, and there's nothing you can do about it." The carefree strut in her step screamed, "You'll never find out." I stood frozen, and she looked me in the eyes. In an instant, she realized I had figured it out. Quickly averting her gaze from my intense stare, she dropped her bag and ran to me, saying, "Chris, I need you so much. Take me." I dodged her advance with a quick sidestep and replied, "No, thanks. That's not necessary." Her face turned into a blank mask. She didn't know what to do next. I'm Paula Walker, and I'm about to turn 30. I'm ready to become a mother. The decision to become parents was almost unconscious. About 6 months ago, my husband, Chris, and I were making love. It was slow and gentle, and for some reason, I whispered in his ear, "Oh God, I forgot to take my pill this morning." His reaction surprised me. The slow caress stopped, and he became almost primal. The only way to describe what we did after that was sheer passion, and our mutual climax was mind-blowing. When we both came back to our senses, I began running my fingers through the hair on his chest and said, "Judging by that performance, someone wants to be a dad." About 2 years ago, I brought up the topic of having children, but Chris brushed me off at the time. He had a lot of work to do on the house. He was right when he said the house wasn't suitable for a baby and might even be dangerous for young children, so I didn't push the subject further. This time, it seemed like the door was open. Chris smiled. "Did you really forget to take your pill this morning?" I laughed. "You know I didn't mean it, but my body told me to say it. I wanted a baby." "No, that's not right. I wanted your baby, and my body needed to know your reaction. I've always been a bit of a planner, so we began to map things out. One of the key factors for me was choosing a time when our child would be one of the oldest in their class. Yes, I read all the studies, and having a child who is the oldest in class does help. So the plan was to stop taking the pill in 4 months. Only after I told the girls that we were thinking about starting a family did I realize the enormity of what I was doing. I had always been the quiet one in the group. All of my friends, especially Steph, had been dating since high school. Their boyfriends came and went in an endless stream. Steph, in particular, felt it was her duty to sleep with as many men as possible. I, on the other hand, was the good girl. I saved myself for my wedding day. I had a few boyfriends, but most relationships didn't go anywhere because I refused to have intimate relations. I started to wonder if I had made a mistake by making that choice and felt like I was missing out on all the fun. I decided to loosen up and live as freely as the others, and that's when the party happened, and Chris came into my life. The party was taking place in my brother's backyard, and I was helping his wife prepare sauces for the burgers when he barged into my life. I didn't think he noticed me, but I definitely noticed him. My sister-in-law glanced at me, then at him, and asked, "Do you like him?" I just nodded but kept staring. She laughed and added, "Relax, girl. His name is Chris. Give me 10 minutes, and I'll ask Alan to introduce you." Alan was my brother, and sure enough, he arranged things so that I ended up next to Chris about 15 minutes after he arrived. My first impression was that Chris liked me just as much as I liked him. We spent most of the day together, and by the time he left, we had already planned our first date. After Chris left, Steph came up to me. "You made your move, so how did it go?" I couldn't help but smile as I replied, "I felt it. He has to be mine." "Go on, big girl, and take that cherry," was all Steph said, and that's exactly what I did. I hid nothing from Chris, and I was so glad that by our fourth date, things progressed to a physical connection. Our nearly 7 years together have been wonderful, but realizing that I would soon be tied down made me feel an itch that whispered, "You need something else, something just for yourself." I couldn't talk to Chris about this because I knew how he would react if he even suspected that I might cheat. He would abandon the idea of having kids with me and might even divorce me. I would never ask for permission to have an affair, so I started talking to Steph. She was horrified. "How could you even think about that? Have you fallen out of love with Chris?" "For heaven's sake, no." I squealed. "I love Chris. I want to build a family with him and be with him forever. That's what I want for us. But there's a part of me that wants to feel like my body can make more than just one man happy. I can't explain it, but I want to have memories like yours about other men. Chris had plenty of women before me, and I need more than just one." "Oh God, Paula, you're crazy," Steph said, "especially now. Why didn't you do this when you were single? I hope you're still taking your pills, because if you do this and get pregnant by someone else, it'll be the biggest disaster of your life." "Of course I'm still taking the pills," I stammered. How could she even think I'd want a child with another man? If I stopped now, the baby would be too young to start school at the right time. No, I planned to quit in 4 months. And then an idea struck me. In 6 months, we're throwing a huge party for my 30th birthday. I'll keep taking the pills until then, do what I want, and then when I get back home, I'll stop. The timing will be perfect. I can even tell Chris I'm delaying it by 2 months to make sure that even a premature baby would be ready for the school year. "How long have you been planning this?" Steph asked, disbelief clear in her voice. "Will you help me?" I pleaded. "Do I have a choice?" Steph replied, "I suspect you'll go through with it whether I help or not, but if I don't, you're definitely going to get caught. So I'm begging you to drop this. Stop taking the pills and get pregnant with Chris. You don't need this, and you'll regret it. I know you'll regret it." And so the deal was made. Steph agreed to invite a couple of her male friends to join us for the big birthday party. The other girls were just as upset as Steph, but agreed to keep it a secret from Chris. As the party approached, I wanted everything to go perfectly. Ideally, I would have 2 different men, one on Friday and the other on Saturday. I told Steph about my plan, and she just shook her head, saying, "This is getting out of hand. You've gone from 1 to 2. Sure, the guys will be happy to sleep with you on different nights, but I'm worried about you." I was overjoyed, and the realization of what I was planning brought me an incredible sense of satisfaction, especially when I cuddled up to Chris at home. I just felt clever. About 2 months before the party, something started to bother me. I couldn't quite figure out what it was. Paula was usually bursting with excitement when she had plans to go somewhere with the girls, and by now I expected her to have a full itinerary, but I had nothing. Her calls to Steph were made away from me. Paula loves to plan outings, and she usually pulls out maps of local national parks, showing me the route she's planning. I hadn't seen anything. I was only told the name of the hotel, and that was it. Normally, I'd hear about a spa, the fitness center, even bars and restaurants. I'd get the full plan. There were also other things about our life that bothered me, most notably Paula's decision not to stop using birth control until after the party. Paula had always been meticulous about planning. She had been tracking her fertility with charts for 2 years, ever since she first mentioned having children. She had already researched schools in the area and timed everything so that the baby would be born just a few days after the cutoff date for school enrollment. She wanted the child to be as old as possible when they started school. She had even analyzed the chances of having a premature baby and concluded that the risk factors for her first pregnancy were too small to worry about. But then, out of nowhere, she changed her mind, basing her decision on something she had already ruled out. It was completely out of character for her. So why did she feel the need to keep taking the pills during the party? She didn't drink alcohol, didn't smoke, and visiting the gym or spa wouldn't have affected her if she were in the early stages of pregnancy. I also noticed changes in our daily life. Our sex life had shifted in a way I couldn't quite pinpoint, but something was definitely off. It was as if she was thinking about something else when we made love, or even when we were just having sex. Her attitude had changed too. She became more dismissive toward me, more condescending, as if she had a secret and was enjoying it. I knew she wasn't doing it consciously, but I could see and feel it. It was enough to make me worry. The party was just a week away, and I couldn't wait. A few weeks ago, Steph had introduced me to the men who were going with us, and I was overall impressed. Hell, I might even squeeze in a quick fling with a third guy on Sunday morning. I was completely absorbed in planning and preparations, and to be honest, I tried to ignore Chris. I bought sexy lingerie and a sheer nightgown, planning to throw them away before leaving the hotel. Chris was hovering around me while I packed my things on Thursday evening. I even had to send him out for some milk. He looked like a little boy who had lost his puppy. First, my body was too sore, and second, I needed to be clean for Chris. I had showered that morning, wanting to look like I had just come home from a long trip. I had to smell like travel, not like sex. The anticipation over the weekend made it feel like the slowest one of my life. I hardly worked, ate junk food, and struggled to sleep. The only thing that lifted my spirits was preparing dinner for the two of us on Sunday evening. By that time, I had convinced myself that Paula loved me and wouldn't do anything to jeopardize our marriage. We had both agreed that cheating was a line we'd never cross. No, I thought I overreacted. Everything would go back to normal when she walks through that door. I was even whistling to myself, then she walked in, and I knew. After parking the car by the house, I looked at myself in the mirror. Everything was fine. I looked the same as I had before, no signs that anything was different. I was exactly as I had been when I left this same spot on Friday morning. Even the soreness had almost faded, replaced by a feeling of desire for my husband. The illusion shattered before I even closed the door behind me. Chris was peeking into the oven, clearly putting the finishing touches on dinner. He's such a sweet man. I will love him forever. Everything in the house seemed normal, but something was off, and I couldn't figure out what it was. Paula was acting strange, and I had a bad feeling. On Wednesday, things went sideways. I received SMS alerts for any use of our bank cards. Paula had an old card she rarely used, but I still got alerts from it. Just after lunch, I received a notification that $199.95 had been spent at Victoria's Secret using that card. This shocked me for a few reasons. First, why was she using that card? It was kept in a safe, so she had to go get it. Second, she hated Victoria's Secret. She always said she looked sexy or naked. I watched her closely on Wednesday evening when she came home. No bags came into the house with her. When I checked the safe at 6 p.m., the card wasn't there. By 8 p.m., it was back. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. So around 3 o'clock in the morning, I left Paula sleeping soundly. First, I went to her car but didn't find anything. When I came back into the house, I noticed her small suitcase by the guest room door. Usually, when she goes away, she only pulls it out the night before, not 2 nights in advance. I opened the suitcase and found nothing inside, but then remembered the zipper top compartment. When I opened it, there was a bag from Victoria's Secret. This clearly wasn't meant for me, but for her to take with her. A quick look inside revealed 2 sets of lingerie, thong panties, a lace bra, and a sheer nightgown. This didn't prove anything, but it certainly suggested something. It was clear my wife had thoughts of cheating on me. On Thursday night, I did what I always do when she's packing. I sat on the bed to talk, but she wasn't interested in talking and eventually told me to go to the store for milk. I left the house feeling pretty low. We always made love before she left for a trip, But that night, Paula said no. Apparently, she had just gotten her hair done and didn't want me to mess it up. In the heat of the moment, I wasn't happy. Friday morning came, and I was up at the crack of dawn. I was on cloud nine. This weekend was my last hurrah, and next week, I was going to get serious about having a baby. I was sipping my morning coffee when Chris walked into the kitchen. He looked terrible. I asked, "What's wrong? You look like you haven't slept all night." Chris grabbed the coffee pot and poured himself a cup of black coffee. Then, he did something unusual for him. He stirred in some sugar before answering. "No, I had a horrible night. I've got this terrible feeling like life is about to fall apart." I wasn't really paying attention to what he was saying and just nodded, replying, "Well, try to get some rest. You know what's coming next week." I flashed him a flirty smile and winked, glancing quickly at the clock. I jumped up and added, "I've got to go. I'm leaving work at noon. I'll take Steph and Karen. We'll ride with Megan." Chris nodded, then asked, "Why are you taking 2 cars? You could all probably fit into one." I hadn't thought about that. We needed 2 cars because there were 8 of us, 4 girls and 4 guys. But I couldn't tell Chris that. I was pleased with my quick response. Karen has to stop by her aunt's on the way back, so she needs her own car. I quickly kissed Chris on the cheek and ran out the door before he could ask any more questions, especially since Karen's aunt had passed away 2 years ago. I just hoped he had forgotten. The drive to work in the first half of the day flew by. At noon, I received a text from Steph saying that she and 2 of the guys were waiting for me at the agreed-upon spot. We had chosen a secluded park for the meetup, so no one would see the men getting into my car. Karen was also at the park, and we headed to the hotel in a convoy, arriving around 2 p.m. My escape from reality had begun, and I intended to make the most of it. As I walked down the stairs, the weight of a million shattered dreams rested on my shoulders. Paolo was drinking her coffee with a smile, or was it more of a smirk? She glanced at me and asked, "What's wrong? You look like you didn't sleep all night." She was right. I hadn't slept, and it was because of her. I answered cryptically, to see if she'd understand. "No, I had a terrible night. I have this awful feeling like life is about to fall off a cliff." It went over her head, and she responded, "We try to get some rest. You know what's happening next week?" That made me feel even worse. If she was planning to do what I suspected, did she really think we'd be having children next week? If she went through with this with us, we'd be getting a divorce by next week. Her attempt at a flirty smile and wink fell flat, but she ran out the door again, giving me a quick peck on the cheek as if to say, "You don't matter. I have more exciting things to do." I sat down at the table and took a sip of my coffee. Why had I put sugar in it? I dumped it out and poured myself a fresh cup, this time without sugar. That felt much more fitting for the moment. My next thought was to try to catch up with the 2 cars, but that didn't make sense. Why did the mention of Karen visiting her aunt feel so forced? It was another unsettling piece of the puzzle, and I didn't like it. Everything felt wrong. It was time to take action. I had to know what she was really up to. I called my friend Dave, who worked as an investigator at a law firm. After a few pleasantries, I asked Dave, "I need to find out what someone is up to. How do I do that?" Dave's voice shifted from friendly to professional. "Who is this person, and what do you think they're doing?" I didn't want to drag Dave into my personal life, so I asked, "Why does that matter?" "Because there are different ways to approach this," Dave replied. "I need to know what your goal is before I can advise you." Unfortunately, that made sense. So I began, "Dave, this stays between us, okay?" He grumbled, "All right." I continued, "Paula went away for the weekend with Steph and the girls. I've got a bad feeling that Steph convinced her to cheat on me." I heard a long sigh before Dave came back on the line. "All right, you need a private investigator. We've got someone for that. Send me the name of the hotel and a photo of Paula. I'll set it up for you. I owe you one, so this will be on the house." With that, he hung up, clearly all business. I emailed Dave everything he asked for. He called me back shortly after. "Okay, the private investigator will check everything out. We'll have a report for you by Tuesday," he said. "My advice, try to forget about it until then. Don't go near the hotel, and only call Paula at the times you've agreed on. We need you to act as normal as possible, so she behaves normally too. I know it's tough, and it might feel like I'm asking you to let your wife cheat, But sometimes life throws crap at you, and you have to deal with it. On Friday, I actually went to work, but my boss sent me home because I looked unfit to drive. I spent most of the day wallowing in self-pity, then went to a bar, had a beer, came back, and sat down to watch a football game. Though I couldn't tell you who was playing, let alone the score. Saturday, I worked in the yard, ate some pizza, and went to bed early. On Sunday, I went shopping for something to make for dinner. Even if my marriage fell apart by Tuesday, I at least wanted to enjoy the rest of the weekend at home. At the hotel, only 4 rooms were booked. Steph came over to me and whispered, "Would you do me a favor and leave, so I can just sleep with Chris this weekend?" I looked at her and said, "Why would I do that? This is my little adventure. Please don't ruin it for me." She took a deep breath, then grabbed Mark's hand and placed it over mine. "Mark, take care of my little Paula," she said before leaving, holding Mike's hand. Mark and I went up to the room, and it was amazing. We had just entered, and were engaging in some light touches when the phone rang. It was Steph. She said they were heading to the spa and asked us to hurry. I quickly went to the bathroom to change into my new bikini, which left little to the imagination and clearly gave Mark some ideas. As he suggested we be late for the spa, I teased him with a smile, "Take it easy, big guy. You'll have plenty of time for that." I teased him with a smile. The afternoon at the spa was fantastic. Dinner was great as well, and after a few drinks, Mark and I retreated to the room. The sex lived up to expectations. Mark was good, he lasted long, and recovered quickly. The next morning, I went to breakfast feeling his presence in 2 ways. Some still in my stomach, and the rest leaving a mark on my clean underwear. Saturday went almost the same, except this time I was with Tony in the morning. We went to the adults-only indoor pool. The evening was nearly identical to the previous one, but this time Tony ripped my clothes off. By Sunday morning, my body was sore and exhausted, but I had enjoyed every minute. After these 2 nights, I realized I was ready to commit fully to family life, and I wouldn't need anyone else but Chris, and hopefully our 4 future children. I dropped off Steph, Mark, and Mike at the same spot where I had picked them up on Friday and got home around 4 p.m. The idea of sleeping with a 3rd guy was now out of the question, so I just started talking and told him the truth. It started around the time we decided to have kids. "I want your children so badly," I said, "but I wanted to have some fun one last time before I fully committed to motherhood. This weekend was supposed to be my farewell to that life. You knew I was a virgin when we met, but my friends were wild. What you didn't know is that I had planned to join them in their adventures, but then I met you. I threw myself into us, and we both loved it, but motherhood loomed. I felt like I'd missed out on something, so I talked to Steph about it for the first time." Chris interrupted me. "I knew that woman pushed you into this." I cleared my throat and replied, "She didn't, Chris. She tried to talk me out of it when I refused. She agreed to help to make sure I didn't end up with someone who might hurt me, and at least try to keep it hidden from you. But she told me not to do it, and she said I was crazy. She'll kill me when she finds out, you know, and that you're going to divorce me. She admired you for protecting and loving me." My tears returned. The most noticeable thing was that Chris didn't move. In the past, if I cried, he would hug me. Today, it had no effect on him, and I didn't miss that. "Keep going, Paul," Chris said. "So we were with 4 men. I hate to tell you this, but you deserve the truth. On Friday night, I was with one, and on Saturday another. The sex was good, but no better than with you. It was just different, and that's what got to me. I'm sorry for doing this. I'm sorry for putting you in this position, especially in front of our friends. And even though it doesn't mean much now, I'm sorry I got caught and ruined what we had." I sat still, staring at the floor, hoping Chris would tell me he forgave me. But deep down, I knew the blow to my marriage and happiness was about to hit. I could feel Chris staring at me, but I resisted the urge to look up. I knew I would see something awful on his face and in his eyes. I knew his words would cut me deeply. "You've been acting strange with me for months," he said. I took a deep breath. I thought I had been careful enough to treat him the same as always, but clearly I hadn't. "You started hiding your plans for the party about 6 weeks ago. That was around the time I met those 4 men. You began closing your eyes when we made love. You started saying things like, 'Take me,' that you'd never said before. Then you got a message, I'm guessing it was from Steph, and you practically ignored me. You had this dreamy look in your eyes, and I, figuratively speaking, wasn't even in the room with you. You never answered me after getting those messages. Then you went and bought something from Victoria's Secret using your old bank card, thinking I wouldn't notice. Did you forget that I get text alerts on that card because it was cloned a few years ago? I went looking for it and saw what you bought. I knew what you were planning when you left on Friday. I knew something was wrong. I convinced myself you wouldn't go through with it, but I had to be sure. That's why Dave arranged for a private investigator to go to the hotel. I'll get the report on Tuesday, then I'll know if you lied to me. How much more could I cry? He had anticipated this happening. He didn't try to stop me, but I thought he should have known whether I would carry out my plans. Though I hadn't lied to him, I had given a vague version of what I had done. The investigation report could be terrible, including details like how the four of us had sunbathed topless at the adults-only pool. I had to ask the question, even though I already knew the answer. What are we going to do next? You know it's over between us since your parents are still alive. I think you should go stay with them. I'll stay here because this is the only roof I have over my head. I'll ask Dave to send over a lawyer to draw up the divorce papers, and we can sign them. We'll sell the house and split everything equally. If you agree not to fight this, we can file for divorce based on irreconcilable differences, split everything evenly with no spousal support, and no need for counseling. If you resist, I'll use the report from the private investigator. It won't change the division of assets, but the information will become public, and everyone will know. What could I do? I said, all right, and went to pack my things. When Paula walked out of the house, the enormity of what had happened hit me. My mother had passed away 5 years ago, and my father just a year after that. I was an only child, so I had no family left, no wife, and certainly no children in the near future. Add to that the fact that in 6 weeks, the house would be sold, and I would be without a home. I cried. I mourned everything I had lost because my wife had an itch. I sat in the car, staring at the house that was once my home. At that moment, I had no more tears left. When I arrived at my parents' house, it felt like I was starting over, but there would be even less sympathy there, if that was possible. As I was leaving, I called Steph. Steph, he knew. I sobbed into the phone, and the tears started streaming down my cheeks again. Oh, damn. I told you this was a terrible idea, and getting caught was always the biggest risk. How did he find out? Steph's concern was focused on the how. Apparently, I'd been distracted for weeks, both at home and during sex. He got a text notification when I made the purchase at Victoria's Secret. He was so suspicious that he hired a private investigator to check the hotel. I messed up. I told him the truth, but left out the details. If he sees what I did and how I was dressed, it's over. Any small chance of forgiveness will vanish once he gets that report. There'll be no going back. Oh God. Steph, what have I done? At this point, I was completely incoherent. Where are you going now, Steph? Asked my parents. They won't let you stay. You know that, Steph said, stating the obvious. You'll have to come to me when they tell you to leave. My parents showed me no sympathy. I had made my own choices, and they told me to live with them. I moved in with Steph and began trying to rebuild my life, piece by piece, as it had been before. Along the way, Chris sent a copy of the investigation report along with the divorce papers. Paula and Chris no longer spoke. Paula didn't contest the divorce, and the decision was made within 10 weeks, with the finalization happening 3 months later once the house was sold. Chris left town. The last thing Paula heard about him was that he had become a long-haul truck driver and left California. She had no way to contact him. Paula stayed with Steph for a few weeks before getting her own apartment. The itch that had driven her to give up her marriage was gone and never returned. She still met up with the girls, but kept her vow of celibacy. She longed for Chris to come back and for everything to be fixed. She dreamed of whispering in his ear, "I'm not taking the pills anymore." But this time she wanted that statement to be sincere. Deep down, she knew it would never happen and that she would never be with Chris again. Now she was saving herself for her husband, and if he wasn't there, she would be alone.